A movie needs some serious tricks up its sleeve if it's going to be the box office king. James Cameron's Avatar was the king for 10 years before Avengers Endgame came along to dethrone it. And then Avatar reclaimed the title again just 2 years later. Question is, how long can you top the box office? So today, let's look at the 10 highest grossing movies ranked by how long they were at the top, starting with Jaws at number 10. A Fun Day at the Beach wasn't quite the same after Jaws hit cinemas back in 1975, quickly becoming the highest grossing film ever at the time. Steven Spielberg's epic monster movie holds the Guinness World Record for the first film to rake in $100 million at the box office, a feat no other movie had achieved before. Who knew people would love watching a huge shark ripping people to shreds? But if you look at the movie's history, it's surprising that it was released at all. Spielberg went over budget, and the huge mechanical shark wouldn't work most of the time. Honestly, Jaws shouldn't have come together in a summer blockbuster package, and yet it became one of the most iconic monster movies of all time, sitting on the throne for 2 whole years before being replaced. Coming up is The Godfather at number 9, 3 years. The Godfather redefined cinema as we know it. Based on Mario Puzo's novel of the same name, Francis Ford Coppola created history when he made the movie back in 1972. It was the godfather of the box office for 3 years before Jaws took the number 1 spot in 1975. Still, it did what no movie had done since 1965, dethrone Sound of Music as the highest grossing film of all time. But that doesn't surprise us because we've rewatched the classic more times than we can count. It won 3 Oscars in 1973, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Marlon Brando. But fun fact, Brando asked Sachin Littlefeather, the president of the National Native American Affirmative Image Committee, to respectfully refuse the award on his behalf. Not bad from The Godfather, huh? Up next is Jurassic Park at number 8. Jurassic Park has some unique box office records that still hold to this day. It's the slowest movie to reach $350 million domestically, taking an eye-watering 497 days, roughly a year and 4 months, to do so, and it also became the oldest movie to hit $1 billion in ticket sales after its 20th anniversary re-release back in 2013. But its most significant record is holding the highest-grossing worldwide record for 4 years, beating Spielberg's E.T. by a mile. And honestly, it's really easy to see why. The visuals for the time were absolutely groundbreaking and hold their own even today. Just compare it to Jurassic World Dominion. There's a reason why Dominion isn't on everyone's best of all time lists, and the original is. Even though both films have crossed the $1 billion mark, Jurassic Park remains one of the most quotable and iconic films of all time. At number 7, it's Star Wars Episode IV: A New Hope. 5 years. 1977 was a special year for sci-fi nerds. Parts of us wish we could go back and see the look on their faces when they saw A New Hope for the first time ever. Out of all the movies in the Star Wars franchise, A New Hope has a special place in our hearts, even more so than The Empire Strikes Back. But it wasn't just a visually stunning space opera that became part of the modern pop culture. It sold nearly 350 million tickets worldwide, ranking in a little over $775 million, easily putting it at the top of the box office. And it stayed the king for 5 years, until Spielberg made E.T. in 1982. Still, Star Wars deserved its 5 short years as the highest-grossing film of all time because George Lucas had created a timeless phenomenon unlike any other franchise before it. Now for number 6, 1965's The Sound of Music. Most people agree that the golden age of Hollywood ended somewhere in the 60s, and if there's a musical that represents its peak, there's no denying that it's The Sound of Music. Featuring sweeping scenery, stunning cinematography, and an iconic soundtrack, the Julie Andrews-led musical took Hollywood by storm. It earned 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, but most of all, it beat Gone with the Wind as the highest-grossing film of all time. Yes, Gone with the Wind kept selling more and more tickets from periodic re-releases, but back in 1965, The Sound of Music took over as the reigning champion of the box office. Interestingly, Box Office Mojo found that 99.9% of all the revenue brought in by the musical was from domestic sales. It hardly scratched the $150,000 mark in international markets. Still, the domestic revenue was more than enough to help it earn the title of the highest-grossing film of its time. Coming in at number 5 is none other than James Cameron's Avatar. In the 21st century, particularly after the year 2000, movies couldn't really hold the top spot at the box office. There was just too much competition, and everyone wanted a summer blockbuster to make a dent in both international and domestic markets. But then came James Cameron's Avatar in 2009, a monumental achievement in visual effects and filmmaking. Everyone thought that there would never be a movie that would dethrone Avatar as the king of the highest-grossing films of all time. But then Avengers Endgame put an end to that in 2019, when it looked like the entire world was inside the cinema watching the finale of the MCU's Infinity Saga. After a re-release in 2021, Avatar took back its crown as the highest-grossing film of all time when unadjusted for inflation. inflation, but it's exciting to see what Avatar 2 has in store for us. Will it take its big brother's spot? We'll find out when December comes around. Next is E.T. the Extraterrestrial at number 4. Spielberg's everywhere, isn't he? The man was a powerhouse back in the 70s and 90s, pumping out blockbuster after blockbuster. And you know what? We're grateful for the man, because without E.T. the Extraterrestrial, our childhoods would have been a little emptier. Almost all the director's movies were winners, but E.T. did something that Jaws was able to do back in 1975, win the audience time and time again. It was a wholesome story about a kid who discovers an alien and becomes best friends with him. With this movie, Spielberg proved that George Lucas wasn't the only big name in the sci-fi arena, and it held its position at the top of the box office for 11 years. Taking the third spot is Titanic. Back in the 90s, no one really knew what it was like for a Hollywood production to earn over $1 billion, but James Cameron, being a pioneer filmmaker, knew there were no boundaries to creating a movie. Released in 1997, Titanic quickly hit the billion-dollar mark at the box office, being the first film in history to do so. It won 11 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Director, and VFX, but that wasn't enough for the epic love story, so it became the highest-grossing film of all time too, and it stayed there for 12 wonderful years. But guess who dethroned it after that? Yep, none other than Avatar. If that doesn't prove that the director knows no bounds, then we don't know what does. In second place, it's 1915's The Birth of a Nation, 25 years. It's very widely known that The Birth of a Nation was the film that started Hollywood's golden age, continuing until the 60s. Back in the day, it was the longest-running film, with 12 reels making up about 3 hours and 3 minutes of film. But it was also a masterpiece of filmmaking, introducing several innovations to the industry and easily surpassing anything that had come before it. Whenever we ask people, they usually say that Avatar was the movie that stayed the highest-grossing movie over 10 years, and we get that because it's the most recent movie to hit $2.9 billion and continues to be a behemoth at the box office. But The Birth of a Nation held the top spot at the box office from 1915 to 1940, 25 long years. The film was a little more than just a groundbreaking technical achievement for Hollywood. It had a positive portrayal of the KKK and featured blatant racism that's hard to stomach today. What's sad is that it was even screened at the White House by President Woodrow Wilson, showcasing just how messed up things were back in the early 1900s. Finally, at number 1, it's Gone with the Wind. We're not done with controversial films just yet. Right after The Birth of a Nation came Gone with the Wind in the year 1940, going on to become the highest-grossing film of its time. And if you adjust for inflation, it's the highest-grossing film in history. Just like Birth of a Nation, Gone with the Wind has problematic themes and a stereotypical representation of black characters, which was pretty typical at the time. It's not a movie we'd recommend watching, but there's no denying that it held the box office record for as long as Birth of a Nation, 25 years. And that's a wrap, folks. Thanks for watching. So, do you have a favorite movie from this list? And why do you think Gone with the Wind was the king for 25 years? Tell us down below. And as always, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more videos in the future. See you at the next one.